to the BODW 2022 Summit. I am Vincent and we're live at M+ Museum in Hong Kong. This year's theme summit is Design for Change, which highlights the vision needed for design to become a force for good. Today, we'll kick off with the keynote session, Building on Water, Pioneers of Floating Cities, to learn more about tangible and innovative solutions associated with urbanization and climate change. Our keynote speaker will be Dr. Koen Ohlhaus, founder of Water Studio NL from the Netherlands. And now, please welcome our moderator, Ms. Tiffany Lau, founder and principal of Apart Companies.
Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to start the day with something that I think is very, very inspiring. I'm joined on stage with Koen Ohlhaus from the Netherlands, who flew in all the way to Hong Kong for this session. We're going to be talking about the Maldives. So the Maldives is not known for many of the world's firsts, but this is where the world's first floating city is being developed. So Koen is going to tell us all about this. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, that's true. The Maldives. It's funny. I will start the presentation. The Maldives, I think for most of people, if you think about it, it's kind of a paradise. If you, as a child, try to draw something about the Maldives, it's small islands, it's blue water. And in fact, almost 1,100 of these islands are like this, very blue waters and green islands. But in reality, if you go to the main island, almost 200,000 of the 300,000 inhabitants, they live on one small island, 2 by 1 kilometer. And it's incredible to see how dense it is. I think you almost can compare it with Hong Kong. And I find that there's a kind of paradox. You see that they're two different worlds, but they need each other. It's a kind of, the economy brings it together. They live from tourism. But of course, if you're an inhabitant, each day you have to go through this traffic, and you live with 3 generations in one apartment. Of course, it's not fun. So something has to happen. And on top of that, because of climate change, we had a lot of floods. And yeah, with floods, it's terrible. You can't do it. The country is 1 meter above, 120 above sea level. So with every little rimple, you get some water into the city. And of course, to make more land, people are looking for reclamation. But reclamation, it's also only half a meter above water, because it takes too much sand. And this happened in 2004 with the tsunami. They were starting to make some reclamation, and it just all was flushed away. So there has to happen something. And if you talk with the government and with the people, they all say, well, we want to go back to the future. We're going to go back to as it was. And how was it? It was fantastic. If you lived in the Maldives like 50 years ago, sandy roads, colorful houses, a lot of space, children playing on the streets, and that's something that they still admire. But how can you combine that? How can you combine this fast-growing city? Everybody wants to be in the capital and do that. So, of course, they have chosen the way that other cities do the same. They have grown up. And this is built by the Chinese in, I think, 5 years ago. And you see that high-rise is getting to the Maldives. And although people are fantastic and happy that they have a place, it's still completely different than the life you expect in the Maldives and that people want to have in the Maldives. So that brings us to why we have a next step and why they move to the water. I think it started all with President Nasheed. He was the former president of the Maldives and a visionary man. They also call him the Green Guru. And he is the head of what they call the island states that are all threatened by water. And he said, well, let's do something different. Let's do an underwater cabinet. Just to show the world that if we do nothing, if nothing's happening, we will just disappear. And either we have to bring our whole nation to another country, or we have to do something else. And that was the moment that the Dutch embassy has called us, because we do some with floating, and we were brought to the government, and we explained what we can do in the Netherlands, and not just being a climate refugee or future refugee, but being a climate innovator. And see how we can use technology to make these places a nice place for the future. If you want to build on water, and definitely when you want to build on water on the open sea, there are some things you have to take care of. Of course, and there can be some earthquakes, there can be heavy storms, and even can be tsunamis. But the good thing is that if your country or your city is threatened by water, the safest place to be is on top of the water, because a tsunami will just go underneath. It's just only like a few centimeters. Earthquake, of course, land. Water is the best shock absorber that you can have. And if you have a big storm, the whole buildings can move a bit and they can absorb energy and they don't break. So it's actually a very logical place to be in extreme weather conditions. So for our location, we found a lagoon close to the capital city, only 5 minutes by boat. And it's a lagoon that has exactly the same size as the capital city. So it's 2 by 1 kilometers. And in such a lagoon, the water depth is around 15 meters, so it's not too deep. And outside, it goes to 50 or to 150 meters. So actually, it's a kind of natural breakwater, the light blue you see, and it takes waves away. So inside it's easier to build floating structures. So we had to come up with a concept, because we needed a lot of houses, 5,000 houses, and of course you can't just build a whole lagoon full with houses. If you do that, there's not enough sunlight. So we looked at brain coral, and brain coral, the funny thing is that nature made this fantastic division between open space and the coral itself. So we used that, and we designed a master plan in which, you see, of course, the brain coral, but it makes a fantastic division between open space and land in a way that everywhere we will still have this, the sunlight reaching the seabed. And the beauty thing is that although we have a lot of water, if you live here in this city, the children will just play on sandy roads. There is not one car, there is not a lot of activities. It's just almost going back to natural. And but if you then look on the other side from your house, you will see the water. So we have almost 17 kilometers of roads or streets, but we have, of course, hundreds of canals and places to use. These houses are houses of 3 stories, 2 stories, 100 square meters, 150 square meters, and most of all, I think we have designed 7 types of housing. But to give them all these different colors, different windows, we can create with these 7 types a complete city with structures. I think for me the most exciting place in the house to be is the roof terrace. Because where do you find privacy in such, again, a quite dense city? It's the roof terraces. And with these types, we have on one side the entrance, other side a little bit garden. We can make 2 types of urban configurations. So either we have streets, very small, 6 meters, and you immediately enter the house, or if you turn them around and connect them again, you get the ones where we have the streets that are almost like 10 meters width. So I always say it's a kind of Lego. You have designed a set of elements and you bring them together. But of course, it's a real city. That means that it's not just housing. We also have to bring all the utilities, but all the facilities for people. So sport facilities, the restaurants, the shops, the healthcare, it's all there. And of course, there is a strong relation with the capital city, because that's only 5 minutes by boat. But still, it has to act as a complete community. And as this is a Muslim community, then one of the most important things is the mosque. So we finally can build our floating mosques, which we have already designed, I think, 12 years ago, and this is the place to bring it. But it's nice. And what we do in this mosque is that we also water cool it. So we pump water through the walls. Walls are quite thick. And by that we can cool down the temperature inside with 3 or 4 degrees. So it helps a lot. Building a floating city is something else than just building a city on land. And that means that we can't actually build in the lagoon itself, because there's coral, there's fish, there's very strong environmental rules. So we have to do it in a different way. So that what we're going to do is we're going to build it somewhere else, and we bring it and then we touch it to the seabed. And we do it with piles, and these piles are telescopic. That means that the whole city can move up and down like 4 or 5 meters in extreme situations, but the stilts are still in the ground. And by that, we create something that is semi-flexible. Here you can see all the houses being placed on these elements, the colorful houses. And there are 2 elements. There are the long streets, and there are the triangle connection points. And each connection point, you have 3 roads that come together. And if you see the whole city in itself, it's what we call a kind of vein system. It's the same as your veins in your blood veins. It makes us possible to pump all the water and the sewage and the electricity through the city to each of these houses. Oh, here you can see it. So if you would open up the floor, if you would look underneath it, underneath the sand, you will see all these structures. So each house can collect its own sewage, and before it's been pumped through the veins to a collection point, and the same with electricity. And when we start building, we will build with these blocks, and these blocks will be connected, and slowly you will see that this whole city will appear on the water. And the beauty thing is that if you look here in Hong Kong, there's so many places where people are building, where there's a place under construction, and you can be under construction for years and years. No construction here. Each time you go to the city, even if it's not finished, you will see that it feels like a finished city, because you don't see anybody building. How does it float? Well, it floats with very large concrete boxes, and we fill them with EPS, with styrofoam. And of course, there's a little bit more to it to make the concrete right and to make sure that it's stable. But in fact, it's nothing else than very large concrete ships, and the ships are all connected to each other. Building them is not on that location, but is in 1 lagoon further, so like 5 kilometers further. And we have on that kind of island, we make a temporary dock. And in the temporary dock, we build these large structures. First the concrete, then the EPS in it, then we place the houses on it slowly. And once they are all finished, that's a big moment, or all finished, it goes in batches of 200 to 300 houses. Then they open the locks. That means then the place will be flooded, and then we can tow each of these structures back to the lagoon. And we built in almost 15 different kind of neighborhoods, and each neighborhood has its own location, and slowly we grow to the city itself. Of course, we had to test it. Building this kind of cities, you don't have one contractor, you have a whole set of contractors. And as the government is a joint venture partner in this development, they want to have local developers and contractors and international contractors. And of course, they all have different kind of capacities. Some are able to build like 20 houses a year, other ones are built 500 houses a year. So we give them all the same recipe, and they can all build the elements in that same dry dock. So for the first feet on water, we tried out the first block with 4 houses, and with part of the sandy road, with the trees on top of it, and to see how it would work. And especially trees for us was a fun way to do, because I was there and I talked to the contractor, and he said, Gun, I have found this fantastic trees, straight and all. I said, no, I want the ones that are curved and that are look natural. We placed them in. We had to learn how to give them water and how it works with being on such an artificial island. But it turned out well, and in fact, I think it's still fun when I'm standing on the roof side there and we have the solar panels there. It really feels like a small community. This first island is not only just to show the people in the Maldives what kind of house they can buy, because they can buy them. They start, I think, at $250,000, which is for the small ones, which is an average price which you also can pay for an apartment building. So it's no, for the average Maldivian, they have a lot of money, but they can just spend it because there are no houses. So that's good. But this first island, we also tested, and you can see it on the image, where we want to see what we can do underneath this structure. Because as you have this whole floating city, you have so much surface underneath it. And we're going to place artificial coral, and we're going to see and research what kind of coral works the best and how we can make a habitat not only for the people, but also for the fish over there. Because in such a lagoon, you will see that on the edge, there's a lot of things happening, but inside is just, it's a sand bed. Just adding artificial coral makes sense there. I want to just show you a short movie from how it looks like, and to give you an idea, here is where we are. So we have right under, you see the airport, you see the capital city, and you see the place of the lagoon. And in the lagoon is the place where we have this first island. So at the airport, you take the boat, or from the capital city, you take the boat, you go to the lagoon. And here's the first island, you moor to it. And then you can take out your shoes because you're immediately on the sand. Inside, it's quite boring in the sense it's just a normal house. You don't feel anything different than a normal house. You have the electricity, it's not humid. And as you can see, you can just enjoy the weather. I must say this first one is not as stable as you can expect in the total city, because all these elements are connected to each other, and when they start to be connected, they're also much more rigid, and they work together. So what we're going to do here, it's not a car-based society, as we see in many cities, but we change it into a boat-based society. That means that we don't want to see any cars on these sandy roads. And we have a lot of roads. We have 17 kilometers. So then the question is, how do you bring cargo? How do you bring people? How do you move from place to place where you can't walk? Because there's a possibility to walk over all these streets, but of course we want to use the water. There will be a lot of transport over the water, and people have the possibility to use boats, although we can't have 5,000 boats in it for everyone, because then it will be too crowded. So we're going to a next step, and that's what we call self-moving vessels. Moving vessels that bring people from one location. You can just have your app, you can just order it, even sewage and garbage is being placed in the structures, and then they move to a central location. Energy. I think one of the most interesting things is that we're going to pump water from 700 meters depth with 5 degrees, pump it up to the city, and then we're going to use it for the air conditioning. So by that we have a reduction of almost 30 or 40% of the energy cost. And in one lagoon close to the city, we have a meadow of floating solar cells. That is, they all move a bit with the waves, and they create energy for the city. And we also have the turbines, the slowly rotating turbines. There's a big flow there, of course, between the lagoons, which we can use. Wastewater is being collected to one point. We have a little bit of sludge, so that means that every 2-3 months there is a sludge boat going to collect the sludge and bring it to a central island where sludge of the whole Maldives is being treated. And then again, if you just see the streets, you know now what's happening underneath a lot. This brings us to I think almost the last slide. What is the combination of the connection between the Maldives and Hong Kong? Well, both it's a lot of islands. I think Maldives has 1,100 islands. I think Hong Kong is in a few hundred. And Hong Kong, as we see here, H2O, it's all based on water. And the question is, would something like that also be happening in Hong Kong? Well, I don't think so. I don't think that we will just start living on the water, but I think we will start using the water. And there was somebody said, well, I don't think it's something for Hong Kong, but Hong Kong has always been a city that has been adapting and adopting technologies. What would happen if we wouldn't have high-rise buildings? No, the city would look different. What if we wouldn't have adopted reclamation? We wouldn't be here at this location, exactly the same. So I think we have the obligation to research how floating structures also can be an added value for this city. And maybe if it's not only above the water, we also can move to what we see on the right is seabed scrapers, high-rise buildings turned upside down, and see if we can go underwater. So, thank you.
Thank you, Koen. Well, I'm a believer. I think that this is the kind of concept that really has application to Hong Kong. You will forever, I think, help us to change the way we look at the possibilities for the built environment. It's a new paradigm. But seeing as you're not from the Maldives, you're actually from the Netherlands. In fact, you've been called the floating Dutchman. I'd love to hear how this applies to the Netherlands and where you're from.
Well, the Netherlands is maybe the same as the Maldives. It's a low country. Even worse, we are below sea level. And I think for decades we've been fighting the water. But there is a kind of change. And we see now with sea level rise that it's not logical to only go into defense and making our dikes and defense system higher. So that there was always this kind of fight approach. But we see now that it costs so much money that in the next 4 years, the Delta commissioners, the one who is in charge of all the water in the Netherlands, they have to make a new choice. What are we going to do? Are we going to raise the dikes, or do we maybe give back the water on some places to the sea? And these are extreme thinkings, because for a country that's always been fighting, that maybe of economical reasons you have to give water back. But instead of fight and flee, we are now looking at the option of flow. And flow means that we start building on places that sometimes are dry, sometimes are wet. That can be amphibious floating structures, but also can be floating structures, and see how you can live with the water. So what we're doing in the Maldives is based on old technology from Amsterdam, floating houses, houseboats. We scale it up in the Maldives, and now also slowly we'll bring it back to the Netherlands in the next decade.
So back to Hong Kong from the Netherlands, how best do you think we can start to perhaps try some of these concepts and pilot something here? You said that maybe you don't see us living immediately on the water, but are there ways to see if this applies to Hong Kong?
I think the only reason why you should use the water is because it should solve problems. So we should find what kind of problems we have in Hong Kong which we want to solve. And I think the idea of what we call city apps would be ideal. So if we need, for instance, more offices or floating restaurants or structures that you can just bring to the city and use them temporary. Use them for 5 years, use them on different locations, tow them to the shelter harbor we have here when there's a big storms. So just to get people used to the idea that buildings, and maybe even higher buildings, 5, 10, 20 stories on water, can also be used for Hong Kong. And then after that, you can see how we can use it in a bigger scale. But you just have to start.
Yep. And I think there's something to be said about how highly flexible but also adaptive this concept is. And that, I think, applies very well to Hong Kong. We need more flexibility and adaptation in our city. You mentioned something in a previous talk about mobile global assets.
Yeah.
So maybe this is what we're talking about. It's sort of the ultimate in the shared economy. And so, I'd love to hear, again, more about what that concept is.
Well, there's a kind of inequality that some countries and cities can have these fantastic buildings and other cities not. But if you're not going to buy buildings, but going to lease buildings, like a floating conference center or a cruise terminal, and you can just rent it for a certain amount of time, and then afterwards send it back to next city, that means that we get a complete new kind of economy. And that means that rich countries can invest in global mobile assets, and poor countries in poor cities can just rent them. It will be fantastic.
Yeah, I believe so too. So I'm going to pivot a tiny bit. We are talking about the hardware here, right? So this is something that's built even though it's floating. But from a people perspective, from a human behavioral perspective, what has your experience been in terms of how people actually respond to these places? Are they open to it? Because, you know, some of the images for me, I don't know how I would feel about living in a place that's completely surrounded by water and I can only get there by boat. So is that something we need to just evolve? How we view these places?
I think so, but if you live, for instance, in Venice, you have also the water. And we're from the Netherlands, from Amsterdam, yeah, canals everywhere. So it's much more, I hope when you build a city right, a floating city, you don't feel it, you don't notice it, and you don't mention it, that is a floating city. It's just a different way of a foundation. Amsterdam, maybe you know, is built on millions of stilts. There's a main building in the city, and that there is 60 by 60 meters, and there are 13,000 stilts under one building to keep it up. So if you think that is a normal foundation, then floating foundations are all not that strange. It's just adapting to this new technology.
It's true. And we are adaptable. We're humans. I wanted to take some questions that are coming in online, actually. So the first one being, I think, a great one. What's the biggest difficulty for you to realize your floating projects, and how did you overcome them?
The biggest difficulties, there are two. One is, I think, the legal framework. So you have to get it seen as normal houses, otherwise there is no mortgage, there is no insurance. And for that we have to do a lot of changes with the authorities, because you must be able to buy or to lease the land underneath it. So that's one thing. The other thing is the logistics. Because building a city, as you can see, you're in the middle of the ocean. So how do you bring materials? How do you bring people? So the whole building process changes from just putting stones on each other to something where we had not to build it, but to assemble it. And in one hand, it's difficult. Other hand, it's also maybe more interesting, more smart, and more faster.
Love that. And are floating cities and the architecture more expensive than building conventionally?
Today, if you build a floating house, it's around 10–15% more expensive than a normal building. And that's because of the foundation. But as a developer, it's not about the cost of the house, it's the cost of the location. So you buy the water, which is cheaper than land, and then your house is a little bit more expensive, but the total cost of development is lower. Of course, it's depending where you are, because now the big cities are starting to understand that water is valuable. So if you want to buy water in Miami or in New York or even here, then people know that water has a value better than 20 years ago.
You know, I can't wait to live in this future that you're creating. Final question, do you live in a floating home?
I wish. No, I'm just living on the house. And that's a very good question, because for years I've tried to find a location in Delft, where I live, to find some water, but it's all very small. And that's a good point, that we have to also explain to the authorities that they have to open water for larger buildings.
Well, thank you so much, Koen, for joining us and flying into Hong Kong for this. Okay. That's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. It was such a pleasure to hear from one of the pioneers of floating architecture. I'm sure these new solutions would certainly inspire more sustainable changes to our urban environment.